everybody, this is an overview of this knife. And this knife is something that I have been contemplating buying for a very long time. And I've had it now for about 2 weeks. And I'm having a hard time figuring out how to evaluate this knife. So the knife that you see before you is a Fiddleback Forge Bushfinger. And this knife is an 01 tool steel. And it has burlap micarta handles. It has white liners and then black liners on underneath. It has the Fiddleback Forge bullseye lanyard hole. And it has what Andy Roy, the guy that runs Fiddleback Forge, calls spalted steel. And so as you can see, there's some really rough texture up here, up on top. It looks rough, but it's just sort of, when you touch it, it's kind of just smooth and not really all that bumpy. Let's see if I can get a better shot of it. Come on. There you go. This is designed to be a bushcraft or outdoor knife. It's a 4-inch blade and a 4.5-inch handle. The handle has a little bit of a palm swell here and a very mild beak in the back. It fits very well in the hand. And as you can see, the handle has a sort of Coke bottle profile. So it's an oval here and then a Coke bottle here. And it's really, really good in the hand. It is just great in the hand. The knife steel is probably thicker than I would like on a knife this size. But if you take a thick knife and you're good at grinding, you can grind it down to a good cutting edge. And you can't get a thinner knife to be as hardy as a thick knife, but there are ways to get a thick knife to be as close to being as sharp as a thin knife. And the overall grind here is a convex grind, but at the final edge, it is not convex, or it's a different angle of convex. And I find this to be a little annoying, because on Bark River knives, or knives produced by Bark River for others, such as the American Knife Company knives, the flat grind usually terminates at the end, so it's one continuous grind. And I find that those knives are much easier to sharpen than a knife like this. You basically just run them across a strop, or you run them across sandpaper and they get, super keen. But now I have to account for the angle on the knife. It's not a big deal, but it's something that I would prefer not to see. This knife has what's called a tapered tang. As you can see, the steel is much thicker up here than it is back here. And that gives you, let's see if I can do this from around the camera. This would be very hard to do from around the camera. Yeah, it's not going to work. I can't do it from around the camera. But this knife is very well balanced. If I wasn't sitting with my hand all cockeyed around the camera, I would be able to do it. But basically, if you want a really well balanced knife, you should be able to balance it on your index finger like that. And what it's doing is there's cutouts in here, and the tang is tapered, and that gives it a little less weight in the butt and makes the knife feel lighter in your hand. And that's something that's very difficult to do, and it shows a level of craftsmanship that is impressive. In fact, this entire knife shows a level of craftsmanship that is really impressive. There's absolutely no hot spots on this handle. One of the things that makes a Fiddleback Forge is that Andy spends a lot of time designing and contouring the handles, and this handle is really phenomenal. It's one of the best handles I've ever seen on any knife ever. But here's the thing. This is a custom knife. This is a one-of custom knife. He has a bunch of different models and he has a bunch of different options, but basically he's not making them in big giant batches. There aren't 10 of them out there with tangerine micarta handles. He basically makes 5 knives a week. He produces, he uses different materials on them, and usually they're different models. And then he sends them out to his dealers, and I got this one from Duluth Trading Company. This is a really expensive knife. This knife is almost $400, and it's a fixed blade, and I get that it's handmade, and I get that it has a lot of nice touches, but it is almost $400. I've used a bunch of Bark River knives, and they're really, really good. I mean, they are just exceptionally good, and in some ways, like with the grind, I think they're actually better. I also really dislike the fact that this spalted steel is done only for aesthetics. I don't think it's misleading, because if you know anything, if you know enough to buy a Fiddleback forge, you know what kind of knife you're getting. But if you go watch his videos, he's cutting these out of blanks. There is no actual forging going on. And so when you have a combination of the name Fiddleback Forge and this spalting, which kind of looks like either heat treat scale or like the forge marks from forged steel like you would see on a Lon Humphrey knife, there is sort of an implication that there's something going on here that's really not going on here. Basically, the spalting is just for aesthetics. And so it's really an expensive knife. I've had one weekend to go outside and play with it, and it has held an incredibly keen edge very, very well. I mean, I haven't used it a lot. I probably used it for 2 hours. And there were no hot spots. The edge held very nicely. It's still pretty sharp, though I don't think it's actually razor sharp anymore. It's a very, very good knife, but it's super, super expensive. And this is one of the first knives that I've ever had where I thought, you know what? I just can't get around the value issue. And that's the way that it is. I mean, like, it's a good knife. It's a great knife. And it looks very unique. That's one thing I should say. This knife looks very unique. You can always tell a Fiddleback forge from any other knife, because Fiddleback forges have all of these sort of unique traits. Like the use of this burlap micarta is relatively unique. The bullseye hole is unique. The spalting is unique. I mean, all of these things come together to make a knife that looks like no other knife. And it's a good knife. And there is a huge collector's market out there for Fiddleback forge knives. So maybe this is a knife like the Randall, you know, where the knife's performance, while great, falls by the wayside to the mystique of the collector. You know, maybe in 20 years we'll be collecting Fiddleback forges the way people collect Randalls. It's entirely possible. I mean, they have a very unique aesthetic, and they do really work well, and they do have that sort of visual appeal, or the sexiness that a lot of the Randalls have. And this knife is just great in the hand. But it is really expensive, especially for 01 tool steel. 01 tool steel is a good steel. It's definitely a steel that I like, and I have on other knives, and it's performed very, very well on those knives. But for this price, you can get a Bark River in 3V or 20CV or M4, and it will outperform this steel every day of the week. And so, you know, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe for the people that are buying these knives, they're bushcraft guys and they don't care. They actually prefer 01 steel because they know its properties very well. They know how to work it and sharpen it. And then the other group of people that buy these knives, maybe the collectors, they don't really care what kind of steel it is at all because they don't really use it. But coming from the folding knife world, where steel is really, really important, it strikes me as odd that there's a knife that's almost $400 that has no moving parts that runs 01 tool steel. I don't know exactly where the money is going, because it's certainly not this. And the burlap micarta, while unusual and not often used, is not terribly expensive. And I know that there's a lot of handwork going on here. I know that there's a lot of work that's done by hand to get these handles just perfect. And, you know, ultimately, in almost every knife, the labor is more than the materials. You know, you have to get into some of the really fancy art knives, like Van Barnett's knives, where he's using gold and gems, before the materials outpace the cost of labor. And so, you know, maybe the price of this knife is tied up in Andy Roy's labor to get these handles just marvelous. And he does do that. But you should be aware before you look at this and consider buying this knife, or before you really start looking into it, that this is not the best value in the world. You know, if I had to get a fixed blade and I had a budget, this certainly would not be at the top of my list. I'd probably go get, you know, the Bravo 1 LT in 3V or LMAX, you know, because it is going to give you, you know, it'll probably give you better performance. Maybe the handle's not as good, but the steel is certainly better. And it'll come in $100 or $150 less. So, you know, that's a tough thing to come up against. But again, you know, if you're in the bushcraft community and you want like super luxe bushcraft, you get one of these, or you get an Adventure Sworn or something like that. Or if you're a collector and you're hoping that Fiddleback forge knives become the very next Randall, maybe this is the knife for you. I'm going to review it, or I'm going to test it some more and see how much I like it, and then I'll write up a written review. And there's every reason to believe that this is going to come out as an awesome, you know, world-class user. But boy, is it expensive. So there you go. When I get some more data, I'll put up a review. But until then, hopefully this will tide you over. And you can check the website for the review. Probably be 2 months or so. Also, the sheath, it's a sheath. It's not as good as the American Knife Company sheaths. We don't have the, where you can do it scout style or the traditional style. I'm not a huge fan of leather sheaths, but if you're going to do a leather sheath, do it like the American Knife Company, because their sheaths are just better than this. They're all made by the same people. They're all made at Bark River by the Bark River folks. So I don't understand why they couldn't just, you know, lash it here, 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 and here, and then let it go both ways. But whatever. And then it has the nominal fire starter loop. So, there you go.